Hello everybody, and welcome to another Game Explained discussion. I'm your host, Ash Paulson, and today I'm joined by John Cartwright and Steve Bowling to discuss John's hands-on preview time with Astral Chain. So let's get started. Alright John, so you've had a couple of days now to play the full version of Astral Chain, because we got our codes in, like earlier this week. And sounds like you have a bit to say about it for our preview, and as someone who played the demo of it at San Diego Comic-Con and got some hands-on time with it myself, I'm really excited to see, kind of how you're feeling about how the full version has been turning out. So, how are you feeling about it so far?
It's good. It's really good. And also, it's worth saying, too, that Steve has played the first 2 missions, I think, so he's played a little bit as well.
Oh, you played? Okay, I don't think I realized you'd play the first 2 missions, Steve. Okay, great.
Yeah, so I'd say Astral Chain, to sum it up, I think it's more Wonderful 101 than it is Bayonetta. And I know that's going to turn some people off, but hear me out. It's like a much cooler Wonderful 101. It takes place in this sort of cyberpunky world. It's far more mature, and the control scheme is far more intuitive. So in Wonderful 101, to basically do attacks, you have to draw on the gamepad, like a giant circle to form a fist or something like that. Whereas in Astral Chain, that kind of mechanic is carried over, apart from instead of drawing, you're rotating your chain around. So a lot of your attacks are basically formed around that chain. There's barely any actual moves you can do without that chain. Basically you have one attack button, which is the R button. So basically ZR is attack and then ZL is your legion. So you're very limited in your standard combos, but it's what you do with that chain that sets it apart. So this is a very unplatinum-y kind of Platinum Games game. It's not action orientated that much, it's more like you're thinking rather than just mashing away at buttons. So if you haven't really enjoyed Platinum Games in the past, I think this might do it for you.
Now that's really interesting, because I remember when I played through my mission and the ensuing boss fight during my preview, there is definitely, I see what you're saying about there being, strategy and thinking involved in the combat, but I still got a really heavy action edge to the whole experience. For me, it felt very Platinum-y in terms of it being an action game that requires you to be on your, think on your feet, have your reflexes sharpened, dodge at the last second to activate this game's version of Witch Time. But it sounds like you kind of took a different approach, possibly.
Well, the thing is this game runs at 30 FPS as well. It's a much slower game
True.
than previous Platinum endeavors. And also, there's a lot of downtime. There are points in this game where you go maybe half an hour without any combat encounters.
Wow.
It's definitely one of the least actiony games to date. You're exploring far more than you are fighting. And when those action segments do come, they're often quite slow. They have forms of puzzle solving in them rather than just pure all-out attacks. So if you're comparing this to something like Bayonetta, then I think you're going to be a bit let down maybe. That's not where the strengths are though. Astral Chain's strengths are where it kind of uses the Legion to its full benefits. So there are 5 different Legions in this game, and they all work completely differently, and using all their abilities is what gives you that combat variety. So the variety doesn't come from a huge list of combos, it comes from just using your legions and sort of expanding across your movement rather than actual moves. So it's interesting in that respect, and it's something Platinum Games haven't really done before, but it does take different abilities from different Platinum Games works in the past. So you'll see a bit of Metal Gear Rising in there, you'll see Wonderful 101 in there, but it's also something completely new. So yeah, actually Steve, you haven't played that much yet, but what are your initial impressions based on what you have played?
So I'm liking it so far. Initially, when you and I discussed the game and I asked you to tell me what it was kind of about before I jumped in, you described it to me exactly how you did just now, and I expressed that I was pretty worried that I wouldn't like it, because I'm not a fan really of Bayonetta or Wonderful 101. They just don't really click for me, but this definitely does feel like something different. You can see that Platinum fingerprint on it, but it does feel like an entirely different game, and I enjoy the combat, which I think it's somewhere in the middle between what you and Ash are describing. I definitely do feel that there's kind of an action kind of edge to it, but I do agree that it's way slower paced than a lot of Platinum's previous stuff, which is probably why it suits me a bit better. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. I'm enjoying it. I've only unlocked 1 Legion so far, so I haven't played with any of the other 4, but the first one you get is a blast to play as.
Well, one thing I did notice too about the Legion, when you have more than one of the coolest features of the game is that you can essentially create your own combos as you swap Legion in and out. So you were always able to hot swap between the 5 Legion, assuming or however many you have, and you can literally like start a combo with one Legion and then switch to another Legion mid-combo and finish it with that. It's like, it's really cool how open-ended the battle system is, though of course my time experiencing that has been limited, though I assume, John, you know what I'm talking about.
Right. When you're swapping legions, you do it with the Y button, and you sort of toggle between each one, so it isn't like this instantaneous swap to whatever legion you want to be. So that does kind of limit your combos a bit, but there's still a lot of variety of what you can do. But then again, I do think this isn't that like much of a combo game. Like, you still get ranked after finishing a fight like you do in other Platinum games, but they also put an emphasis on different difficulty modes. So that ranking mode is on the higher end. The easier ones don't rank you at all. And you even get ranked for conversations in this game, which kind of shows you what it's really all about. It's not just about the fighting. So whenever you first start a mission, the first thing you have to do is go around and talk to NPCs and get clues for what's happened in this area. And when you get those clues, you're then tasked with answering like what you think is going on. So let's say there's this giant monster floating around, and you have to try and find out what it is. So basically, you ask a bunch of people, get what they say, and then you're quizzed on it. And if you get it wrong, you get a bad rank. If you get it right, you get an S rank. So it takes that kind of Platinum grade system and applies it to just about everything. There's you get graded for basically exploration, you get graded for observation. So yeah, it really isn't a game that's all about combat. It kind of merges everything together. And it does work, but there are points where it gets a bit excessive. There are moments where I just hadn't had a combat encounter in a long, long time, and I was starting to miss it. And sometimes those parts where you're being quizzed, sometimes they're really fast, other times they take a long time. There is a balance to be found there, and I don't think it always finds that balance.
Right. So it sounds as though if there may be any main issue this game has going forward, that it could be the pacing, possibly.
Yeah, I'd say that. Yeah.
I will say that I got a sense of that even during my demo, because I got to play one of those city investigation sections followed by its accompanying combat mission, and it very much felt like the game kind of just cycled between those two things, like those two modes, kind of, you know, I went back to the city after, and I got the sense that, okay, I go back to the city, do another investigation, and then if I had more time to play, I'd just go back out into another combat mission. And neither was, like, I had fun either way. Like, I really enjoyed the combat, but it did seem as though the pacing and just kind of the way this game plays out might become a little predictable at times.
Yeah, agreed, yeah. And also there's this place called the Astral Plane, where basically, in the Astral Plane, this is the Astral World, so basically where the monsters live. And I kind of liken it to Zelda Shrines, where every single area looks the exact same, but it's also where a lot of the combat takes place. It is kind of repetitive in how it looks, but you're not really paying attention to that because there's so much going on while you're there. There is definitely a formula to how this game progresses. But it's also worth noting like how you progress in this game, because people are confused whether it's linear, whether it's open, and it's kind of a mix of both. It's more linear than it is open. So there's definitely a core structure to the mission. You can explore, you can go off the beaten path, but you're still kind of secluded to where you can and can't go. But if you do go off the beaten path, you'll find things like, you'll find treasure chests where you can find like more medicine, or you can get money which you can then use to upgrade your legions or even your weapons. So there's definitely a good purpose to going off the beaten path, but it's not required. So it's still kind of a linear Platinum game, but there is more to do outside of just combat.
Gotcha. I will say that I enjoy those exploratory sections, because it's funny, my treehouse guy who was doing the appointment with me, Demetrius, he kept having to guide me back onto the main track, because he's like, we don't have time for you to go exploring. It's really cool that you can do that though, right? Because look at all this cool stuff you can find if you're really looking at the environment carefully. Good job, but please get back to the main mission so we can have our next appointment on time. So that was pretty fun, and I agree. It's fun. It's not like obviously open world, but it's kind of this, like you said, in the sense where you're in a confined dungeon, but you don't just have that one main path to go down, and you can kind of branch off. And what I noticed is sometimes when you do that, your abilities are tested. Like, there's platforming in this game, as you know, John, but not in the traditional sense. Like, your main character can't jump. Instead, you have to warp your main character to where your legion is, kind of. It's kind of a weird... You can probably explain it better than I can since you've had more time.
Sure. So it's worth noting how integral the Legion is. The Legion's basically an extension of you. So basically, in order to jump, you have to first move the Legion with the right analog stick while holding down ZL, and then you move it to wherever you want to go, and then by pressing ZL again, you'll basically jump straight to where your Legion is. So it's just sort of an example of how regularly this game intertwines both your combat abilities and the Legion's combat abilities. Because they are used just in exploration. And the funny thing is as well is NPCs can't see your Legion. They're basically invisible to them. And you can use that Legion for some surprising mechanics. Like quite early on, one thing you have to do is eavesdrop on this guy who's having a sort of a shady phone call. And obviously if you're close by, you're wearing like a cop uniform. So he's going to start whispering if you're close by. But one thing you can do is hide in the shadows, get your Legion to go like next to him, and then eavesdrop on him like that. So yeah, it keeps finding like some really interesting ways to use your Legion. And yeah, platforming's one example, combat's another, and then there's just a bunch of other ones too.
Cool. Well, one thing that really did stand out to me when I played the game was the graphics. Frankly, this game looks, in my opinion, better than any Switch game has any right to look. It's easily, from what I've seen, one of the best looking games on the Switch yet, despite maybe some sameness in the environments. Steve, how about you? Did you get the same, have you gotten the same feeling as you play through?
In some cases, yes, and in some, no. So it definitely has beautiful environment graphics. There's really good particle and lighting effects in the game, but I have noticed that some of the character models look kind of, I don't want to say low poly, but they don't look their best. I wouldn't put them up against like a Mario Odyssey model or even like Breath of the Wild necessarily. They just don't. The characters themselves sometimes look a little bit out of place with how good the environment looks. But that said, it's not distractingly bad. It's just you kind of it's something that some people will notice though.
Yeah, and also handheld mode is not native. I can say that.
No, it's not.
No, at some points it looks quite good. At other points it looks kind of a little bit jaggy. And one cool thing as well actually there's a photo mode in this game. And you can take selfies, but you can also give your Legion the camera and use them like a selfie stick.
That's cool.
I did notice though, I was doing that in handheld mode, and I was trying to get a good picture, but your character model just gets so pixelated that you don't want to use that for photo mode.
Sure.
Yeah, it looks fine docked, but in handheld mode, it's probably not best to take photos in that mode.
Yeah, well, given all the all the crazy particle effects and lighting and everything going on, there's probably a variable resolution in play for handheld mode, is what I'm thinking.
Sure.
So that makes sense. All right. Well, one other thing I noticed, because you guys know you're talking to me, was that it had a really cool soundtrack that seems very geared toward electronic music and like synthy kind of like electronic dance music type stuff. And I was told that they actually hired a lot of EDM composers to do the soundtrack for this, at least in part. What has your experience been with that, John, so far?
It's incredibly good, Ash. It's,
nice.
Those combat encounters, those big boss encounters, they are so adrenaline pumping. I think it's some of Platinum's best work, honestly. The track from the initial debut trailer is on their Twitter right now. Have a listen to that because that's really good. But it maintains that quality throughout the entire game. There are so many great tracks. Even the lower energy tracks, they're still really good. Like when you're just exploring, just the ambience around you is very atmospheric.
So you're gonna hate me, but it's not that I dislike it. It's just that I haven't heard much of it. So my experience with the game extends from like last night, and so I played it. My kids were asleep, so I had the volume down so as not to disturb anyone. So yeah, unfortunately, I've heard like the combat sound effects and the gun sound effects, but I haven't really gotten a chance to really listen to the music. But after hearing what you two have to say about it, I'll probably be digging out my headphones and trying it that way.
And Steve, you probably know this actually because you have played the opening hours, but it's quite a story-heavy game. Have you got that vibe from your playtime?
Yeah, absolutely. I was gonna say that this, I'm a huge anime fan, have been since I was a teenager, and this kind of scratches that itch for me a little bit. It has kind of a shonen or seinen manga type of narrative to it. So I find that I was surprised. I was expecting just like a full tilt action game all the way through, and there's surprisingly a nuanced story here that I'm sure is going to unfold further once I get past the first couple of hours. But they do a lot of world building in the very beginning of the game to explain to you why it is people have legions and what makes you special to be able to control one and what chimeras are and everything like that. So I'm really impressed with it.
Yeah, it's not really clear who the good guys are either, because basically the thing with chimeras and legions is they are one in the same. Neuron, who are the police force, they're basically capturing them and forcing them to be their allies. And your main boss guy is super shady. So like you're sort of asking yourself these questions about what's going to be happening over the course of the story, and it doesn't get that clear in the opening hours. Like it's still super unclear what's good, what's bad, what your role in this is, because you have this kind of special role as well. You notice it quite early on, like your hair glows up and no one else's does, and you perform these super high energy evasion attacks in cutscenes that no one else can do. They bring attention to this as well, so it definitely draws you in. And it gets far deeper as it goes on. Of course, I can't say any more than that, though.
Right. It's definitely interesting. Like you mentioned, there's kind of like a subjugation or slavery aspect to the whole relationship between Neuron and Legion. So it does leave you wondering kind of if you're on the right side of this or not.
And the thing you said about anime as well, Steve, is this game has a J-pop anime intro.
I didn't
right
know
at the
that.
start.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's all in-game cutscene, but it does have a J-pop track, which is pretty cool. It definitely brings out that kind of anime intro vibe.
Well, I will say that it does seem like there's much more of a focus on story here than any of us might have expected. And to go further from that, I think when people hear Platinum Games anime story, they might think, okay, well, kind of Bayonetta is going to be very basic, very just kind of fun and over the top and goofy, but not necessarily good. And it sounds as though Astral Chain kind of veers away from the over-the-top Bayonetta, like, we don't care if this really makes sense aspect of things, and more tries to tell a genuinely interesting, good story.
Yeah, absolutely. And it does so with some great presentation as well. One of my beef with Bayonetta is that most of the cutscenes are just flat story panels. Like, Bayonetta 2 improved upon that, but the first game barely has any animated cutscenes, outside of the opening cutscene. But Astral Chain, the entirety of it is animated. So yeah, in a lot of respects, this game does take steps over Bayonetta, even if they aren't really that comparable in their systems.
Right. Well, and speaking of the narrative and the presentation, I did notice during my time that it's funny. Astral Chain to me is like the poster child for the kind of game that would have a standard issue flat anime dub. But that's not the case from what I've heard. Like, the voice acting is actually, in my opinion, a cut above what I expected.
Yeah, absolutely. Also, one thing is you build your own character at the start. So basically you choose between a male or female protagonist. And you can change their hair, you can change their eyes. And basically the one that you don't choose becomes, I guess, a core partner throughout the game. So let's say that you choose the female protagonist. That means the male protagonist is going to be a major story character. But they aren't actually around all that often. The thing is, they often get like kidnapped or something, and you end up trying to save them. If you prefer the female character, it doesn't make much of a difference. It just kind of changes who's going to be the NPC and who's going to be the main playable character.
I do have a question for you on that front, John. So I picked the male character. Did you pick the female?
I did, yeah.
Okay, so do you still get the Sword Legion if you're the female character? Because in my playthrough, she has the Archer.
No matter who you play as, you still get the Sword Legion, so nothing changes. The only thing that changes is basically the voice actor.
Well, it's kind of an interesting approach they've taken here, because there is this character creation aspect, as you mentioned, John, which I also, by the way, I think it also lets you change the skin tone, right?
There's a bunch of different skin colors to choose from, yeah.
Nice. Well, what I was getting at was that it's kind of interesting the approach they've taken here, because there is this character creation aspect, but the character you create still has their own presence within the game, right? They're not like this silent protagonist that you are the hero. It's like they still have their own kind of demeanor, right? Despite how you make them look.
So yeah, basically your twin is voice acted, but you are not.
Okay.
But they definitely do have personality. Like they have these certain animations they'll do, which gives you an idea of who they are. But they are a little bit of a blank slate, though, I must say. But I think your twin is meant to reflect that, though.
Now, John, going back to the skin tone question, do you know if you change your character's skin tone, does your twin also change to match?
No. Your twin looks like the default twin no matter what you do, which is super weird.
Yeah, that's really weird. Okay. Wow, how bizarre. Well, all right. How are you feeling so far about the potential length of the game? Obviously, you're super early in, John, so I know you can't say too much, but do you feel as though you're kind of speeding through the story kind of quickly, or does it feel like there's going to be some length to this?
I think it might be beefier than other Platinum games. It takes a lot longer to finish a chapter than it would in Bayonetta. I can't say exactly how many chapters there are to speak for the overall length, but it feels like they get more out of levels than they ever could before, and in that respect maybe it will be longer in the grand scheme of things, if the volume's the same. But yeah, you spend a lot more time in a level than you ever would in Bayonetta, for instance, because it's not just encounter after encounter. They let you linger a bit more. So I think it might be longer than other games, but of course I can't give a definitive answer on that just yet, though.
Alright, well, I think we've mostly covered everything we need to here for this Astral Chain preview, but is there anything else you guys want to go over before we wrap up here?
There are dogs and cats in this game, Ash. There are so many cats, and there is a dog legion, and you can pet this dog legion. So that is an automatic win, and this is Game of the Year.
Automatic. Game of the Year. That's done. Done. Although, Bloodstain does have a Yorkie monster, so there might be some competition.
Can you pet it, though?
That's true. You can't. You can only kill it, so you're right.
You can pet it with your sword, I guess.
Yeah. Right.
I do have one more question for John. So I've only played through to get one Legion, like I mentioned before. John, it sounds like you've got all of them, or at least 5 of them. Now, for me, meter management is kind of a big deal with having only one, because it has an energy meter that ticks down fairly quickly unless you fill it up with corruption. When you have 5, do you work off of 1 meter, or do you have 5 meters for 5 legions?
So I think it would probably be a bit overpowered if you could just swap between them and basically never take your legion away.
Right.
Because that is kind of a limitation of combat, is your legion is basically on a timer constantly. And if you pull off some of the more powerful moves, it's going to drain and drain. So there are moments where you'd have to just take your legion away and fight with your bare hands, or at least with your baton. And I think that kind of works with the combat. If you could just swap between them over and over, that might kind of break the systems.
And you brought something up there, John, just now that might be worth going over really quick, is that you don't just have 5 different Legion weapon types that you choose between. You have access to a few different weapon types of your own as the police officer. Like, you have your baton, there's like a great sword type thing. Do you want to go into that a little bit about how that plays into, mixing and matching your Legion weapons?
So yeah, your primary 2 weapons are basically your baton and your gun. And if that sounds familiar to any other kind of hack and slash like Devil May Cry or Bayonetta, that's because it is. But the systems, how it works is kind of different though. You kind of equip them rather than them being just standard attacks. And you can also buy a bunch of different upgrades in what's essentially the hub area. So between every level you go back to the police station. And here you can buy upgrades, you can go to a training area and just try and figure out any more abilities that you can do. It's just a nice place to breathe and upgrade your character. So yeah, there are different weapons that you can choose, but the functions of them are more or less the same between them. They're just like some are more powerful than others, or some are ranged, and some are close quarters. But of course there's also different things you can do with your legions. So the Sword Legion can cut, the Bow Legion can, well, basically fire a bow, and it just goes more and more like that. So there's a lot of different abilities that you can do, even if they are kind of limited in their executions. But it's how you sort of consecutively use them one after the other that makes them a bit more in-depth.
Right, okay. And actually something I just recalled is that each Legion also has an environment, like a contextual environment move they can do, right? Like the Sword Legion can slash through certain locks, which actually reminds me of Metal Gear Rising.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's a bunch of different Platinum stuff in there. Absolutely.
Yeah.
There are sort of puzzle-solving things you can do with your Legions as well. Like, for instance, there's a part where you're sort of you're stranded in this room and you can't progress. And so you end up looking above you and there's this target up there. So of course you can take the Bow Legion out and just fire a bow at that. So yeah, that especially in the astral plane areas, that's where you're going to be using those puzzle-solving techniques. And also gyro controls are used during those as well. So when you're cutting with the Sword Legion, you can move your controller around rather than just sort of clumsily moving the sticks around.
And we know how you love gyro, so this has to be a plus in your book.
Yeah, I mean, this game has dogs, has cats, has gyro, doesn't have Kiddy Kong. I mean, it's all good.
Perfect. No, it hits every checkbox. To bring things back around, I will say that I've been thinking about what you said about the flow and the speed of the combat, John, and also compared to what you said, Steve. And as I think about it, while I said that I felt that really hardcore action edge like I do in other Platinum games. I do recall that, like, doing the dodge, like when you do a last-second dodge, you activate this game's version of Witch Time, right? Everything slows down, you can get some free hits, and it's really cool. But I remember now that in Bayonetta, I was not good at doing that because everything is so fast. Whereas in this game, I pulled off, just in my demo alone, I pulled off a ton of really stylish last-minute dodges, which I assume kind of goes along with the fact that everything's just a little bit slower than something like Bayonetta.
On top of that as well, is enemies sort of, they telegraph their blows with far more detail than Bayonetta does. Because Bayonetta, everything's moving so fast, there's so many different moves going on at the same time. With this, there's giant wind-up animations, so you definitely get that dodge period far more instinctively than Bayonetta ever does.
Cool, and I really like that too. It felt very rewarding and visceral when I pulled off like a really stylish last-minute dodge. Like I felt cool doing it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of opportunities to pull off like really cool counter moves that are specific to your Legion. For instance, like John was saying, the windups are huge, and that's a good thing because one of the very early bosses has like a charge move, and it's very clearly meant for you to stretch your chain out and catch him. And they make it very easy for you to notice that that's happening. Like it even draws a huge red line across the screen to let you know what his path will be. It's a little too easy for some, but it does lead to you getting the satisfaction of getting to toss a huge monster on his face.
Alright, well then I think that does it for us here. So as always, if you enjoyed this discussion, please hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and ring the bell. Otherwise, stay tuned to Game Explained for more on Astral Chain, the Nintendo Switch, and all things gaming. Until next time, guys. Bye.